Saying no as a security function is not an option. You have to give them alternatives to do the same job more securely, right? So, as a CISO, it is not about saying no any longer. It is about making sure how can I help you do the same thing in a more secure fashion so that the risk is low for the company. And when I took over the CEO role, my biggest shift was I had to learn to say no. Yeah, because it's extremely important that if you're trying to drive a company in a certain direction, there will be a lot of opportunities which will come your way, and you will have to say no more than you would typically do as a CISO. We are living in a hyper connected digital world. I can't think of any sector where you don't have a large supply chain and a value chain driving the outcome or driving the business, right? There is an over dependence on the supply chains. And in last 1 year, in fact, last 2 years, all of us have seen how poisoning of supply chain has impacted the real businesses. Because fundamentally, a lot of these industries, the systems work on a trust, right? And when the trust is broken, you may invest enough to secure your own attack surface or your own organization, but if you don't enforce that towards your supply chain, it will cause disruption sooner or later. We're talking about buying a security product. What about the security of that product itself? So, the availability of that security documentation for that product and the services itself, and the willingness of the vendor to bring their subject matter experts up in the front for us to talk with, I think that is another one we keep an eye on.
Hi, Bithal. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. I'm super excited for our conversation.
Hi, Sasha, and I'm too excited myself for this conversation with you. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
I'd love to just do a brief intro of you and to our guests. You had such a long and exciting journey. You've been recognized by Forbes India as one of 8 experts who reinvented cybersecurity. You're currently CEO at Gramax, and you're also one of the very few CISOs who made leap to CEO. So I think a lot of CISOs who are going to be listening to our conversation going to be curious, okay, what is the next step for me? And I think it's very interesting path that you're on and that you took that a lot of people want to learn about. But before we go from the very start, how did you get into cyber? Where did it all start? Was it something you always wanted to do or not really?
Sasha, interesting question. How did my journey start as cybersecurity? Well, when I began my journey, I spent around 8 or 9 years in doing something known as performance engineering, which is all about making sure the service availability of the infrastructure and the applications are up to the mark, be it availability or the performance part of it. Did that for 8, 9 years. It was extremely operational job to manage infrastructure. And I had this desire to do something strategic. I went to my boss and I requested him, boss, I want to do something strategic. My ask was not to do something in security. I said, I want to do something strategic. I was in General Electric back then, and which had a lot of great leaders. So that's how I got the first job in cybersecurity. And he said, well, will you be willing to chair a working committee of application security leaders of around 12 companies who work for us as a vendor? And that was my first job. And when I started working on that role, I realized that a lot of fundamentals and basics were missing in that application security space, the way it was dealt with. And because I had come in from a mindset of troubleshooting, that is integral part of when you run infrastructure, right? So yeah, I started asking those questions. Well, things like you're talking about reducing the vulnerabilities, but what happens to the developers? Do they have the right tools to be able to find the vulnerabilities early on? So there were a lot of no's I received as a response, and that's how I began my journey. So did that for a few years, and then I took on a role which was more into the governance. So did that for a large supplier program for General Electric globally. Did that, and then back in 2013, I took my first CISO role for Sub-Sahara Africa. And then on things, one thing led to another. I got a chance to work with a lot of great leaders. I learned from them. So I ended up doing multiple CISO roles for multiple geographies or regions. And that's how I landed myself where I am today.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating journey, and at times it's even difficult to imagine that making such a massive leap from one space to another. It's very interesting to imagine. So, how did you even approach this question? You said that you came to your boss and you said that you wanted to do something strategic. What did you have in mind when you said that? And how was it different from how it turned out?
Well, when I said strategic, I was looking primarily from a program governance standpoint, a program management, where
Mm-hmm.
you can drive the outcomes which are long term in nature. That's what I had in mind. And cybersecurity problems, it came to me as a problem statement that we used to have a pool of 15,000 developers working across the globe. And the problem statement was that how can you reduce the number of vulnerabilities or percent of vulnerabilities in the source code being delivered to the company? It
Mm-hmm.
just happens to be in the space of cybersecurity. It came as a business problem, right? So that's where I started working towards how do I reduce the number of vulnerabilities in the deliveries done by these vendors to us as a customer. That was a business problem statement I had to solve. That's how I learned cybersecurity.
That's very interesting. I think it's not common that it happens where people approach cybersecurity more from business standpoint rather than something that is sort of preventing business moving forward. So it's sort of reverse mindset that you adopted that really helped the business, and that actually connects with my next question. When you made that leap to becoming a CEO, what was the hardest part of it? Or did you find it to be relatively easy when you went on this new role?
If I add to the previous question a little bit more, if it
Correct.
makes sense for the audience, right? And you said it beautifully. You said you approach cybersecurity like a business problem.
Mm-hmm.
What we ended up doing back then, it's been, I think, 17, 18 years now. The things which we introduced back in the group, and which is like business as usual today in the software fraternity, we introduce best practices for coding for the developers. We mandated trainings, application security trainings for the developers. We gave the tools to the developers. We gave the tools to the QA guys, the testing guys, right? So we pushed the tools for testing early on in the software development life cycle, right? We built a centralized platform through which we could track the number of vulnerabilities by developer, by application, by vendor. So we invested a lot in building that whole data model,
Mm-hmm.
which gave us the critical insights there. So I thought I'll just add that, Sasha.
Of
Coming to
course.
your current question, if you can repeat the question again, I'm sorry.
When you made this leap from being a CISO to becoming the CEO, what was the most challenging part? Because it's still not frequent that you meet a CISO. There are frequently jumps to becoming a CTO or CIO, but less frequently becoming the CEO. So, what do you think? Perhaps some difficulties that you faced along the way, and what are some skills that you think helped you to make this leap?
Well, this transition has been seamless. And if you see from the perspective I see things, the CISO role, in all respect, is like a CEO role. You have a mission, you have an outcome to achieve, you don't have enough resources, okay? You don't have teams to carry out your missions. So you operate a lot on communicating with the stakeholders. You operate a lot on influencing the ecosystem, right?
Mhm.
You rely a lot on innovation because you will not never have enough budgets to go about buying the tools which you want to buy.
Mhm.
So, in a lot of respects, if you think a true CISO who's not just compliance focused, compliance is one part of the job, but
Yeah.
who wants to secure the organization against the cyber threats will actually operate like a CEO. So, from that perspective, it was a seamless transition. I had a desire to make sure that as a CISO, I have enough resources to deal with any kind of a situation.
Mhm.
Now, in cyber world, as you know, it's extremely dynamic. You have new situations emerging at every point in time. So how do you make sure that you have enough people, enough talent, enough skills, enough tools, and enough intelligence uh, available to you? And that's where we started operating more as a company, not just as a cost center. We said, if I have a partners beyond my team, outside my company, that is how I will be able to have enough resources to be able to tackle with any situation. I think that is how I transition, and that's what made job or transition that much simpler.
Hmm. Hmm. But I'm just thinking, sometimes there is a certain polarity that exists between CISO and the CEO role, because as a CISO, you're trying to mitigate risks. As a CEO, your priority is to drive business to the next level. How did you rewire your brain the way you approach a certain situation? For example, whenever you want to adopt a certain technology that is going to help drive business, but then as a CISO, you realize that there are potential risks. For example, OpenAI just announced the new browser Atlas. So I'm sure that a lot of organizations would want to adopt that technology. But from CISO standpoint, maybe that's something that still needs to be looked at on a deeper level.
Again, I'll go back, Sasha, to the mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a CEO, essentially, you're doing three or four things. One, at the core of what you're doing as a CEO is you're doing a risk management of organization's mission, okay,
Mm-hmm.
on behalf of your board or your stakeholders. Number two, you're driving the growth for your shareholders. Now, number three is you're driving the right culture within the organization. Those are three key things which you do as a CEO: growth, risk management, and third is the culture. Those three things done right essentially is a recipe for success for any organization. Now, you
Mm-hmm.
put that in the context of being a CISO. As a CISO, so if you're working for a conglomerate, and a lot of CISO roles sits at a corporate level, which means there are multiple companies to be secure.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a corporate function, a group CISO typically sits as a corporate function. Your growth is not the revenue, your growth is expanding the footprint of your program and the impact of the program across the organizations or the companies within your ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does it need? It fundamentally needs that you need to map your stakeholders out. You need to go and convince them. That's how you do it. It's just that as a CEO of a company, you get paid for that. That's the only difference,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're making money for the company in that process. But I would think every CISO is a CEO, and that's how they should operate.
Hmm. Was there something that surprised you once you stepped into the CEO role that you didn't anticipate when you were a CISO?
My response might surprise you. A lot of people say that the primary job of a CISO is to say no. There's
Mm-hmm.
a joke in the community. They say, "Well, it's the easiest job. You just simply keep saying no until the person comes back to you in person, right?" But the times which we are living in, everybody is digital savvy. All business leaders are digital savvy. Okay, so saying no as a security function is not an option. You have to give them alternatives to do the same job
Mm-hmm.
more securely, right? So as a CISO, it is not about saying no any longer. It is about making sure how can I help you do the same thing in a more secure fashion so that the risk is low for the company. And when I took over the CEO role, my biggest shift was I had to learn to say no. Yeah, because it's extremely important that if you're trying to drive a company in a certain direction, there will be a lot of opportunities which will come your way, and you will have to say no more than you would typically do as a CISO. I think that's the biggest surprise for myself that I find myself saying more than yes now compared to what I used to do when I was CISO.
Well, it does really sound like opposite worlds went different directions. And do you find yourself saying more frequently? Is it because certain decisions drive or move the organization to a different vision, or what do you think is the reason behind it?
Cybersecurity as a company or as an industry is extremely crowded
Mm-hmm.
market, right? You have to be very strategic with respect to the direction you want company to take over the period of time. The opportunities will emerge in every sector, every type of work. That's where you have to be selective because cybersecurity is all about trust and deep skills. And
Mm-hmm.
you will remain relevant as long as you are doing something repeatedly over a period of time. How deep you are in the subject for a given sector or the area of security you're trying to make strategic for the company's growth, that's where you have to say no.
I see. I see. It's a completely different mindset than I would have imagined. I think it's a big learning for anyone who wants to or is considering what is next for me. You know, maybe they would have to be saying no more frequently than they are at the current job. So it's very the opposite world.
Yeah, no, as a CISO, you can't afford to say no. That's the point. As a
Hmm.
CISO, you have to enable. You can't be the firewall because
Hmm.
business will have its need to do the ways in a certain fashion because that's what business demands. So as a
Hmm.
CISO, it's your choice. If you help them find the safer path, more secure path, compared to say, well, no, you can't do it. With the advent of cloud, SaaS, all of these things, anybody can be a CIO. You just have to call a vendor and say, well, I need an app for my function or my business, and you will get it. End of the
Yeah.
day. So you have to work in collaboration with the stakeholders. So as a CISO, don't say too many no's. Work
Hmm.
with them to help them to find a safer path.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And you also, your role includes leading teams in so many geographies, and also in your previous roles, you worked across so many geographies. What's one security challenge that surprised you by leading in so many different geographies and just in general?
I think while technically cybersecurity as a field or the problem or a solution remains same across all the regions of the world,
Mm-hmm.
however, what's different is the contextualization of the threat and the business for a given region. It's extremely important. Somebody jokingly said once that the safest country is a country which is notoriously known to run the phishing scams from Africa. They are safest country because the guys are focusing outside more than their own country without naming them. So it's important to contextualize the cyber threats from a geography standpoint and also the business you are operating in. That is not technical work. That's the beauty of it. So you have to get non-technical, put on a risk hat to understand here is who I am, here is where I'm operating. Let me see who is a threat to me, what is the risk for me. So that is what drives the difference between every geography, the contextualization of it. Now, I think in the same length, what would be common across all the geographies is the people. Now, it surprises me. We all of us, and I've said it before on different platforms, we as humans are fundamentally wired up here to think about our own safety and security. That's how we have evolved as humans, right? But when it comes to the digital world, the same sense of safety and security takes a back seat, as if it's a totally different realm. The very fundamentals of security remains exactly same in the digital world as well. So I've seen that as a common thread across all the continents I have worked so far. Everyone does. I think it's more of a humanity problem than the regional problem, I guess.
Yeah, it's probably one of these problems that can be described as short term versus long term impact, where, let's say, when it comes to physical safety, you almost feel the impact immediately, while when it comes to digital safety, you
Yeah.
almost don't know when it's going to come. Um, so it always comes by surprise. But when you spoke about different regions, right, and different ways how people contextualize security, some countries are more prone to trying new technology. So, as a someone who's been a CISO and CEO, how do you look at the world of AI agents right now? Everyone is super excited about it. But is this something that you see certain geographies being more excited about? And you personally, how do you look at this tech?
I think agentic AI holds a lot of potential, and I think it will take maybe year or two, one more year or two, for the use cases to finally settle in. Right
Mhm.
now, we're going through this hype cycle where there's a lot of excitement, a lot of experiments, a lot of pilots and POCs are happening all over. And I'm sure in a year or two, there will be, let's say, 20% of those trials and the use cases will settle in with a real impact. There's a lot of excitement about, oh, let's try the new technology. The world is talking about that. But what matters from a longevity of a particular tech is the real business outcome. Agentic AI holds a lot of potential, and I hope it finds a relevance across the industry so that because there are the real benefits. It's not too difficult to understand that there are real productivity and efficiency benefits for the businesses if this is really successful. Everybody and we as well, we are right now doing multiple pilots to see where all can we use it and how can it help us to become more effective.
And talking from the opposite side, as you know, we're being excited about AI agents and agentic AI. From more of a security standpoint, do you see people responding, having this counter response to all of this technology? Because while it is getting adopted, do you think is it secure enough today to continue as we continue?
The phase we are in right now, people are trying to understand, they're trying to experiment, they're doing trials right now. What's important is to notice that the real adoption in the business scenarios should not be mindless. It has to be thought through in terms of what risk will it bring to the table? Will it increase my attack surface? Will it really have a business impact? I think there has to be mindfulness which has to come in the real adoption. The large tech companies are looking at it. A lot of large businesses also are looking at it right now. But I would say, while we are very excited, but we would rather wait for us to see if it has a real business impact. That should drive the adoption of that in the industry.
Yeah. So, what do you think, in your opinion, right now in 2025, what is still one of the biggest threats that companies should be preparing for right now?
Okay, so Sasha, we are living in a hyper connected digital world, right? I can't think of any sector where you don't have a large supply chain and a value chain driving the outcome or driving the business, right? There is an over dependence on the supply chains, and in last 1 year, in fact, last 2 years, all of us have seen how poisoning of supply chain has impacted the real businesses. Without naming some of the scenarios, I'm sure your audience and you can figure out. There was a major cybersecurity product which had a faulty update pushed through all the
Yeah.
agents, and that brought down the multiple banks and a lot of critical infrastructure assets globally. We very recently heard, I think 3 weeks back, something happening similarly in Europe as well in the transportation sector. I think supply chain is one area is should be the focus because fundamentally a lot of these industries the systems work on a trust, right? And when the trust is broken, is you may invest enough to secure your own attack surface or your own organization, but if you don't enforce that towards your supply chain, will cause disruption sooner or later. I think that is one area for enterprises looking at what has happened in the last 2 years should be a focus area, supply chain.
Yeah, I think this is the issue that is keep happening and repeating itself quite frequently, no matter which area, which age we are living in. The world is so interdependent that is difficult to imagine the time when, as you said, ideally we would want to have the scenarios where we have these contingency plans, but at the same time also realize the risks.
For example, we're using this platform for recording this webinar. You're
Yeah,
using a SaaS-based software. I'm sure you won't know if the platform service provider pushes out a faulty update and that stops the streaming right away.
yeah,
Correct. So
true.
that's why it's important to focus on that.
Yeah, in your long experience in tech, what's your best war story that you've encountered and the biggest learning you got from it?
If I have to pick up one, without naming the customer, without naming a lot of actors in that scenario, but we did deal with one such situation a couple of years back, wherein a lot of critical infrastructure assets were targeted by one of the, it was hacktivist group.
Mm,
And it was a very well coordinated attack which happened across at least six different critical assets for a particular nation. And
mhm,
resilience, what we had built for that customer, helped us save the day. So, out of those six assets, two were managed by our company. So they were the ones, the only ones who stood the ground because we believe in building the resilience in the business operations and the infrastructure, and not just focusing on, oh well, we run the SOC, we put EDR. No, it has to go beyond that. There has to be a strong resilience mindset which has to be built into the company. So in that scenario, when the attack happened, attack continued for around 48 hours. And what we learned from that is, well, you might have a crisis management business plans. You might have done hundreds of drills beforehand, but when things hit the fan, I think it's a presence of mind, the well coordinated coordination in communications between teams, segregation of duties. A lot of things you take for granted. Those comes handy. And that is one incident which comes to my mind, one case which comes to my mind. Managing a crisis has to be a muscle memory beyond just a document. You should be able to assume a role. For example, when there is a fire in some building, you will see a lot of passerbys will stop by and pick up, assume the roles automatically. Somebody will go out to look for a fire hose, somebody will pick up a bucket, somebody will pick up maybe sand lying on the road, right, to do the job. I think that has to become a muscle memory. That's what we learned from that particular one.
of course, I think the main conclusion from this story is that you always have to keep on doing fire drills, no matter how comfortable you are feeling at this particular moment of time. That can be one of the situations of calm before the storm. So always be prepared and never assume that you're in that spot where you can feel absolutely safe and comfortable. And I'm sure when it comes to dealing with a lot of these incidents that happen prior to that, of course, you expect that vendors and solutions also able to help you out on the way to prevent this incident happening from the first place. So back when you were a CISO, what were some, I would say, red flags that you saw in certain solutions that would immediately turn you off? And what are some qualities that made certain solutions stand out to you?
I think the number one red flag is the use of jargons, marketing jargons, right? And I have seen it over the time again and again that it's same wine in the new bottle in most of the cases. Older the product, the history of the company, I've seen it multiple times being repackaged every couple of years as something
Mhm.
new, right? So my number one red flag is how much are they relying upon the new marketing jargon backed by certain research organizations quadrants. That's number one. That's where I want to dig in further to know a little better what exactly is happening, right? Number two, the lack of appropriate security documentation, because you're talking about buying a security product, right?
Mhm.
What about the security of that product itself?
Mhm.
So the availability of that security documentation for that product and the services itself, and the willingness of the vendor to bring their subject matter experts up in the front for us to talk with. I think that is another one we keep an eye on. We also look at other red flag is from a see generally for a security vendor. Who do you want as a CISO? Who do you want to be a security vendor? You want someone who you can trust and you have
Mm.
unconditional support, because as a CISO you're trying to have as much as resources available to you when things goes wrong. As I said
Yeah.
in the beginning as well, right? If we don't sense that, if we don't get that comfort with that vendor, that well they may not stand, and if I have a need at an hour where I have to ask them to increase, let's say, give me a dedicated instance or more licenses in the middle of an hour, and they may talk about commercials at that point in time, that's a red flag as well.
Mm.
I hope that those 3 4 points does answer the question.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And particularly the last point that you brought up, it's just made me think perhaps an unusual analogy, but it made me think of a hotel experience. Since the second that you enter a hotel, you always want to feel welcome. You
Yes.
always want to be treated right at every step of the process, because at the end of the day, your whole impression, no matter how nice the room is, if the welcoming wasn't that great, that ruins the whole perception of a certain place. So, similar to vendors, you want the whole experience to be seamless. And as you said, trust is the number one thing that should be provided by a security vendor, because that is the value proposition of the whole
Yes.
of the whole industry.
And I'm going to steal your analogy here of about the hotel experience. That's
Mhm.
important. Yeah, I think you got it very very right.
Yeah, yeah, please do. And what are some green flags that you see? I know you spoke about, okay, these are definitely the things that we don't want to see. What are the things that make you think, wow, this is someone I want to be really working with?
And it may have a little regional nuance or connotation to my response to that. The region can be any. So, for example, if you're an American company and you're looking for a security vendor, you like to have someone who's available to you, where there's a willingness of that vendor to be able to, let's say, enhance the product to your need.
Mm,
Same applies for Singapore, same applies for Middle East, same applies for India as well. You
mm,
like to rather deal with the leadership of the vendor at an executive level who are beyond sales.
mm,
Okay. Now, it's extremely important because in a lot of countries, and I've run security operations for almost 180 countries, I can tell you that you need to be working with a vendor who's ready to listen that the product needs XYZ changes for it to be suitable for the environment, because no two environments are similar, right? They're similar, but they're not same. So that willingness to work with the customer of a vendor, I think that is very essential today. That's number one green flag. Now, the industry which we deal with, Sasha, we are on a mission to secure critical infrastructure, which is of industrial nature, which means it is not a crowded place, which means there are not many subject matter experts who has actually entered the boundaries of these assets which we are trying to secure. For example, we deal with securing power plants or thermal power plants or hydropower plants. We deal with airports. These spaces are sacrosanct when it comes to physical security, which means not too many people have clearances to enter. Unless you have seen or touched firsthand, you won't know, right? And security is all about knowing what that is, what you're trying to secure, and having a solution or a product or a service which is tailor made or a purpose built for that environment. So for me,
yeah.
that is of high value. The solution should fit in my environment I'm trying to secure really well, because I'm giving a first-hand experience to my partner there to experience the space and maybe use it as a competitive edge in the market.
Mm. Very helpful. I think, as you said, you want to have this. compatibility whenever you're deciding who you're going to be in a business relationship for a period of at least 1 year, because I think a lot of contracts today are signed 1-3 years. So it's almost as you're entering in this relationship where you want to make sure that you understand each other, both from vendor standpoint and from a customer standpoint. It was really
Indeed.
good point. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of CISOs are considering what is going to be next for me. What is one advice that you can give to them in terms of what are capabilities that they can start learning about or taking some courses to get to a CEO role, let's say?
I would highlight few attributes for who are aspiring. I would think start every day afresh. You have to listen more. You'll have to learn every single time before you put in the burden of your experience and exposure to the situation. The business and the domain we are in, it is all about dealing with unknown. And there are nuances for every single case which we handle, right? So while to make your experience and exposure as a CISO your advantage, but not a restriction. It's very easy that you may preconceive how to deal with certain situations. So be open to listen to when you're dealing with the businesses. Be willing to learn, right? And then you contextualize that with your own experience and exposure to say, well, this is how I advise it can be done. So fundamentally, start afresh every single day is just one line I would suggest there.
No, it's very helpful because whether you're a CISO or you're in any other role, you always see the job that you're doing from your personal lens and from your personal attitude. But as you said, you have to start afresh, um, and listen more and yeah, reconcile all the opinion in your head and make the leap one day whatever the destination you choose to go. So yeah, Bithal, we have this tradition on our podcast where typically our previous guest would ask question to the next guest. So this is the question our previous guest asked you. What's one security control you've never cut during a budget crunch and why?
That would be endpoint security because it's even more relevant in today's time when either it's the identity of a person or it's the endpoint device, right? So endpoint device security is something I will never compromise upon. And endpoint can be your laptop, desktop, server, mobile phone, anything, because you
Mhm.
will access the gateway through that device. So the least you can do is make sure that you have appropriate security control on that device. What it can be, it may differ from a situation to situation, but you can't ignore endpoint device.
Yeah. Endpoint security is always the last layer of defense. I know that many organizations create that
Yeah.
security attack, but when it comes to endpoint, this is the last layer. So this is the very least that you can do. And what question would you like to ask to our next guest?
All right. I think if you may ask the next guest, what percent of a price of a product or a service is he or she willing to pay as a premium for security, for example? And it is not limited to the security products. It's to do with as a consumer. You go out to buy a television, for example, and these are all connected devices. What percent of the price you'll be willing to pay as a premium for additional security features on that device as a consumer?
Hmm.
That's a question which is in my mind. And it can be anything. You go to buy a car, and cars are connected. But if they say, well, I have a model of the car which is far more cyber secure, how much are you willing to pay for those products mentally? I think that's a question I have for the next guest.
That is a very challenging question because I'm just thinking if we go back to the point of endpoint security, I think certain features you are willing to compromise and certain features you cannot compromise. Um,
So the way to think is you go to buy a laptop.
Yeah.
I'm not talking as an enterprise. I'm talking more as a consumer. You go to buy a laptop to a store, and they say, "Well, here is the laptop at price X, but here is another laptop, same configuration, but it comes with DLP, comes with EDR, XYZ. How much
Mm.
are you willing to pay that premium for that?" I think that's the mindset. And if you understand that you can apply that to any walk of life, any product, any services which you buy as a consumer.
That is true. That is true. I wonder, and I'm more than sure that whatever usually happens in the work side of things, in the end, also influences your personal life. Because I cannot imagine as a security leader if you have all the tools in place and then in your personal life you just decide to use the same password that you were using back when you were 12.
Indeed.
So it's I'll make sure to find out the answer for you, Vital, and then share whatever the next guest is gonna answer.
I look forward to hear the response. Sasha,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
thank you, thank you so much. I think we've had such a great conversation. Not often that I get the opportunity to speak to someone who was CISO before and now the CEO, and I loved how you explained the way you approach your role today because a lot of people would assume that these roles are not that connected, but it seems like there are more similarities than there are differences. And it's a big lesson to learn for everyone who are thinking, what is the next step? Because that can be the natural extension of the role. And yeah, it's been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much, Bithal.
And thank you, Sasha, for having me. It was wonderful talking with you today.
Thank you.